I think one of the most impressive presidential campaigns that we've ever seen in American history.
Wow.
Trust me, mark my words, he's not going anywhere.
It's so shocking that a woman can
Mm.
win a beauty pageant for women.
They're holding on so tightly here to the fact that if you have a suppressor, you turn into an assassin.
Today on the Aussie Wire News, we'll hear from North America correspondent Julie Hartman about Donald Trump's resounding win in the Iowa primary and what that might mean for the other presidential hopefuls such as Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. Then Aussie Wire correspondent Anna McGovern will join me to break a truly world-changing, earth-shaking story. You will not believe your ears on this one. And finally, I'm joined by Ozzie from Ozzie Reviews to discuss a topic that most news outlets will not touch, and that is the positive aspects of guns. All that is coming up right now on the Aussie Wire News. Well, the US presidential race has kind of officially now finally got underway, not directly of Democrat versus Republican or people electing the president. Americans do this weird thing called a primary process where there's effectively direct election of what the candidate is going to be for the Republican and Democrat parties respectively. Yesterday, we saw a resounding result in favour of Donald Trump. He's taken a resounding lead in the fight to become the Republican, the GOP nominee. Here to help us understand what this means, what are the implications, what's going to happen from here is our North America correspondent, Julie Hartman. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Hofer, thanks so much for having me. And we know the process is weird. And let me tell you, a lot of Americans don't quite understand it either.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I was going to say, look, you guys, you're a bit weird over there. Like some of the stuff that goes on. So talk us through, what are they actually fighting over at the moment? Because they're not fighting over the presidency.
Well, they actually are. So right now, they meaning the Republicans, are fighting for who will be the nominee in the Republican Party for president of the United States. So the way our political system works is that you have two nominees from the two major political parties, the Democrat and Republican Party. Sometimes, actually quite frequently, there are third party candidates, but those are the main two. That's the showdown between those two. And so right now, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, and Donald Trump were vying to get that nominee to be the GOP nominee. And so Iowa is the first race, if you will, and they go to all of these states and they vote and they're allocated a certain number of delegates. But just to make it less complicated, Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. That's all you really need to know.
we can cut to the chase. You don't need to be worried about it. Look, the Donald Trump steamroller is definitely underway, and I think that was fairly obvious from a little while ago. I will say my wife and I were in the US in 2016 before the 2016 elections, and we came home and told anyone who would listen that Donald Trump was going to win. It was very, very obvious when you were on the ground in the US that he was going to win that election. I will say it also seemed very obvious to me that he was going to win the 2020 election, but we better not say too much about that or YouTube is going to pull the video. However, it does seem that he's going to be the nominee for the Republican Party this year. Where does that leave these others? You know, you mentioned Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis. Given the strength of this lead, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a record-breaking lead for any candidate in a GOP primary in Iowa. Where does that leave the others?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all thought that Trump was going to win in Iowa, but this just was stunning, really a stunning victory to your point. As far as where it leaves the others, I think Vivek Ramaswamy has a long career in politics. He's only 38 years old, and he ran, I think, one of the most impressive presidential campaigns that we've ever seen in American history.
Wow. Trust
me, mark my words. He's not going anywhere. Nikki Haley, I do think her star is fading. I don't see a long career for her in politics. Some people say this as a diss to Nikki Haley. I'm really just being earnest saying this. I think she'll go on some board of a corporation. I don't really think that she'll have longevity. And I think Ron DeSantis, he is a beloved governor of Florida. He's done a fantastic job. And so I also see a future for him too, which is exciting for those of us who are Republicans, because we have some other rising stars in our party. It's not just all about Trump.
There's some quality and there's some depth there. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy came fourth out of those four candidates that we're talking about, and he immediately suspended his campaign and is in fact going into New Hampshire alongside Donald Trump and calling on his supporters to throw their weight behind Donald Trump. There is, of course, there's a question of who the presidential nominee is going to be. There's also the question of what vice president is that presidential nominee going to pick to run alongside. Do you think Vivek is trying to get an early ticket into that VP position?
Perhaps he may be trying, although I could be wrong on this. I don't think that President Trump will pick Vivek as his VP, even though Vivek is more than qualified. I think he would be an excellent leader. I think he would have been an excellent president. But I think that Trump is going to choose someone on his ticket who maybe isn't so much like him. I mean, certainly he wants to pick someone who shares his values and his policy positions, but people are calling Vivek Trump 2.0 because he's very direct. He's sometimes can be rather too direct, can be bombastic, a bit like Trump. So for some reason, I think that he's going to steer away from Vivek. However, again, Vivek has a long career ahead of him in politics, and I wouldn't be shocked if he were in some cabinet or advisory role to President Trump.
Well, it's worth keeping in mind, typically US presidents that do successfully get elected are not competing in their first election, at least not as far as the primaries are concerned. They will go through that primary process usually a couple of times before they finally come out as the nominee. Trump was an exception to that, but exceptions to that tend to be very rare. So to what degree do you think someone like a Ron DeSantis now, he came second, of course, in Iowa, and it was a decent showing, but just nothing compared to the juggernaut that was Donald Trump's results. To what degree do you think he's simply maintaining his run as almost practice for the next time around? And to what degree do you really believe that he thinks he could reel this in and become the nominee?
Oh, I think it's what you just said. I think that he is teeing himself up to be the successor, because what Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis understand is that for some reason or another, Donald Trump is not going to last beyond 2028. Let's say he's elected in 2024. But he may, I mean, God forbid, something may happen. I mean, he may, there's always an October surprise, Topher, here in the United States. Remember that the biggest issue of the 2020 election, COVID, didn't happen until March of that year. So I think that they both understand that the Trump moment, for, again, any number of reasons, will eventually fade, and they are trying to position themselves as carrying on the torch.
It certainly looks that way, and as you said earlier, it's wonderful to see a bit of depth there. It's quite exciting to see that where only a few election cycles ago we were talking about people like Jeb Bush, now we're talking about people like Vivek Ramaswamy. What does that say about the public appetite, the public attitudes? Is this being driven by the GOP recognising the direction that it should go in, or is this being driven by the public demand for better quality of leadership?
Oh, I think it is the latter. I think that many people are actually saying that the GOP, which is right now headed by Ronna McDaniel, does not take kindly to outsiders like Trump or Vivek, would rather go with more establishment leaders. I think what is happening is that the American people are seeing that the system as existed is not working for them. Many people refer to what's called the uni party. That is, there isn't a Democrat and Republican opposition, but that they're all kind of the same people, but just have different labels. And I think that there has been evidence that that is true. I mean, under past Republican administrations, we have seen that they have allowed and even at times given credence to wokeism infiltrating into our institutions. We have seen that some Republican leaders have not been as strong as many conservatives claim they are on issues such as the border. So I think that Donald Trump has revolutionized Republican politics permanently. He has made it America first and populist. And actually, I think he's kind of gone back to what the Republican Party was in the Reagan era.
Well, it's certainly going to be very interesting. Who the US president has repercussions right around the world. So it's a relevant issue even for us here in Australia. We're going to stay on top of it. Thank you so much, Julie Hartman, for joining us here at the Aussie Wire.
Thank you, Topher.
Well, every now and again in the news business, you have the opportunity to talk about a truly extraordinary story, something earth-shattering, something that represents a change in epoch. In fact, we might even have to update our calendars to before this and after this. Such is the import of this moment. I am, of course, talking about nothing less than the Miss America Award being given to an actual woman. It's quite extraordinary. It's not something that I had on my bingo card for 2024, I can tell you that. And to talk about this extraordinary news with us is Anna McGovern. You're a wonderful addition to the Aussie Wire team. We're very happy to have you here. Tell us about how could such an extraordinary event take place?
I know, it's pretty shocking. I think in the news as well, you just see so many trans women, men, winning those titles. For example, you had Miss Netherlands, Miss Portugal, and you see so much of this on the news that it's actually now shocking that an actual woman can win a title that is designed for women in the first place. I think what's incredible about the story as well is that she's serving currently in the military, and I think it just shows as well that, not she's being celebrated as a woman for what she does. And it's not another woke virtue signal that's being pushed out to make them look good. This is actually, this is kind of representing what the pageants are meant to be about.
Well, it is quite interesting. It's quite extraordinary because I do think, as much as I take the piss out of the story itself, I do think there is actually something kind of bigger going on here. It's hard to prove because these are the things that happen sort of behind closed doors and inside people's minds. But I would never have expected Miss Universe or Miss America over the past 20 years to ever give their top prize to someone who's actively serving in the military. That just silently the judges would have gone, oh, well, she's not the kind of person we want to promote. We'll find someone who's actively working in some charitable thing or actively working in some social cause or actively doing something else. But the fact that they're in the military would have been an unspoken veto. And yet quite clearly that's not the case. Now, either it never was and I was wrong all the way through, or perhaps do you think this maybe represents a bit of a shifting of attitudes?
I have read this, and that was something that might have been true in the past, but I think this definitely represents a shift in attitude. And I think as well, there are many roles in the military that are suited for women. And I think that it just attests to the fact that she has many talents. And that's something that we should be celebrating as well. Not just looks as well. She's doing something, contributing something real to society. I think, this was something that in the past might have been the case, but I actually think that it is representing a shift. And I think actually that could be a good thing.
Oh, I don't disagree that it could be a very, very good thing. For me, where this gets genuinely interesting for me is where we're seeing a number of companies having to kind of take a step back from the level of wokeness that they've previously achieved. An example in the US that's not related to the cultural stuff, but the Hertz rent-a-car company is now selling off tens of thousands of electric cars and replacing them with internal combustion engine cars because they're viewing that as a failed experiment in electrification. They're having to go back to the ICE. Victoria's Secret here, of course, famous for many years for their sometimes, frankly, scandalous runway shows that they would put on, and their underwear and their supermodels, and they had a very clear brand and a very clear look. You can like it, you can hate it, but everyone knew what it was. And in the last couple of years, they've gone very progressive. They've been all about body positivity and all sorts of other things like that. Their sales have plummeted, and we've recently seen them turn around and say, oh, we're going to go back to being sexy again. What's going on in the bigger picture culturally? I mean, firstly, how did these companies do such stupid things in the first place? And why is it that we're seeing now a growing number of them changing direction?
So I think for many of these companies, they put out products, for example, that would probably be to act as a virtue signal, to signal how progressive and kind they are. And we're now representing this group that we consider to be a minority. And I think the more ridiculous that it's getting, the more that people are starting to realize that it's getting absolutely out of control and they just don't care for it, which I think also is shown by the fact that the sales are plummeting and people are just not taking an interest anymore. They could see right through it. The companies are only doing it as a virtue signal, not because they actually believe in what they're putting forward. It has no meaning behind it. And I think now that the public is, showing it for itself by the fact that it's not, the purchases are not being made.
You say it has no meaning behind it. I couldn't agree more. And if anyone disagrees, I challenge you during Pride Month, go and have a look at all the social media handles and the social media images for the Middle East departments within large international corporations. They'll have the rainbow flag over all of the others, and then the Middle East department will still have their traditional logo. They don't believe a word of it. It's just about virtue signaling. Well, Anna, what are they going to think of next? Women are now winning the Miss America pageant. Are we going to let women vote soon, do you think? Like, what's the next sort of step of progress on this amazing pathway that we're on?
That'd be a push. But I think as well, the fact that we even have to have this conversation and that it's so shocking that a woman can win a beauty pageant for women, I think it just shows how far gone many of these industries and institutions have gone, because it's now shocking that, something that's been going on for a very long time is now come back again. We have a woman winning the pageant and not a man. Like, I think it definitely represents a cultural shift.
Well, mark today in your diaries, ladies and gentlemen. This is the day that a new epoch has begun. Perhaps, just perhaps, we've seen peak weird, peak madness, peak woke. Maybe some sanity is coming back. Anna McGovern, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire. Well, ever since 1996, Australia has had a national firearms agreement, and a lot of weapon types have been banned. Specifically, semi-automatic rifles were taken off our streets in an enforced buyback. If you wanted to keep them, you had to prove that you needed them for your occupation and jump through a bunch of hoops to get a license to be allowed to keep such a weapon. We were told that it was to keep us safe, and we were told that it was just the semi-automatic rifles. But that isn't quite how it's worked out. And Ozzie from Ozzie Reviews joins me now to talk about the fact that, well, it's not really over, is it, Ozzie? It just seems like they're constantly adding more and more rifles to this list of rifles that we're not allowed to have.
Correct, mate. But it's not only rifles. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's a real privilege to be here with you. But, mate, it's not just rifles. Since 1996, we've had magazine bans, on certain capacities, depending on the configuration. That's both pistol and also rifles. We've had caliber restrictions and bans. We've had cosmetic appearance restrictions. Yep, exactly. We've even had lever action, shotgun bans. The list goes on, and unfortunately, it's just continual. Even if you do absolutely nothing, you don't say anything, do anything, the bans and the proposals just keep coming and keep coming.
Look, I'm not a firearms owner myself. I don't have a license. I don't own any guns. I did spend a couple of years in the Army Reserve. We played with guns quite a lot, including ones that are explicitly outlawed for civilians in Australia. You know what? No one actually shot anyone else while I was there. No, none of the trainees, none of the recruits, and none of the privates ever decided to go on a shooting spree. I'm not quite sure why. You can figure that one out for yourself. But one of the things that strikes me is the enormous amount of fear that is built around this topic of guns. And I remember I spent a year studying acting, and we had to do some pistol shooting as a part of that, just to get used to guns, because guns come up a lot in acting roles. And one of the participants, a late 20s female, had basically an emotional breakdown and couldn't stop crying in hysteria just from being near. She hadn't even fired a gun yet, just being near guns that were being fired downrange. What do you make of the amount of fear-mongering that goes on about firearms in the media?
I think since 1996, they've done a good job. I have to admit, they've done a really good job at instilling fear into people. It got to the stage after 96. I mean, I was an adult, very young adult in 96, but, I was affected by that. And the general consensus, and it was like a dirty feeling, they painted all of us with the same brush, If you were a gun owner, you were a mass murderer in waiting. And that was what they had started pushing really hard back then. So a lot of people did. They handed in firearms, and then they didn't ever get another firearm because they felt guilty, they felt dirty or whatever. And this is the push that they've continued on. And in combination now with catchphrases like military style weapon, or their favorite one, rapid fire weapon, and the problem is any firearm can be a rapid fire weapon. So if it just gets adapted to, their push for removing firearms from licensed shooters, they can do that with anything. I mean, let's be honest. How many articles have we seen in the news there where it's simply a 22 and you see a little 22 case on the ground and it's been in some shooting at a 7-Eleven or something like that, and they're going, a high-powered weapon was discharged, and you're seeing a little 22 case. I mean, they can talk anything up and manipulate it to suit their agenda.
So I have a theory that if something is more frightening when used as a stick than it is when used as a rifle, then it should not be regulated as a rifle. It should be regulated as a stick. And certainly most of your air rifles, the fact that we regulate air rifles in this country, I think is a national embarrassment. But then you get through to your more high-powered stuff, your more serious stuff. And look, let's be honest, a rifle can be used to kill. Hunters do it all the time. They're using it to kill animals. We do know that from time to time people misuse rifles and misuse pistols in crimes. They use them for the commission of a crime. To what degree, though, are we finding a link between lawful firearms ownership and that sort of criminal use of firearms?
And this is the problem that I find when you go to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Like, there's no breakdown with their, for example, yearly homicides with a firearm as to who's licensed and who isn't. Now, I look at it this way: if they were licensed, we'd all know about it because they would be promoting that and pushing it in the media. So, I mean, I'm sure there is the data, but I don't see it publicly put out there. So, in saying that, mate, I look at it this way. There's over 1 million of us here in Australia. So yet another day's gone by without a million of us killing anyone or doing anything wrong. So, and people say, oh, but what about a couple of years ago when that licensed shooter did X, Y, Z? And it's like, okay, we're all human beings. So let's break down the statistics out of 1 million. If every couple of years we have 1 or 2 licensed shooters who actually do something wrong, give me, and I'm open to suggestion here, give me an example of any other community group that we have in our society that has such a great track record.
Well, it is interesting because many things can be misused. Some of the most deadly mass attacks in history throughout the world have actually been done with trucks driving through crowds. And I don't see anyone trying to ban high-powered trucks. They're a necessary tool. Let's talk about that for a second, though. There are people out there who would say no one needs a gun. What are the practical applications of a firearm?
Numerous. I mean, I can talk from my own perspective. Obviously, I run a cattle property, so the use of a firearm is needed, obviously, when I have to put down any sick or injured stock. But the big thing for me is pest control. Now, I've got a big problem with wild dogs, in southeast Queensland here, and I spent 8 years out running my own feral pest control business, controlling, feral animals on other properties. And the most I've seen in wild dogs, this is personally, is 36 dogs in a pack. Now, when you're getting dogs like that and they're taking down a fully grown beast every 3 days on a property, that is severe. That's substantial financial loss, not only to the business owner, being the farmer, but the environmental impact on that as well, because dogs, unfortunately, do spread a lot of disease, wild dogs. So, if you're expecting to go up on a pack of dogs, especially in those sort of numbers. I mean, even let's take it a lot more smaller on average numbers, say like 8 to 10. Okay, now that's what I normally get around here. So if you're going to walk up on a pack of dogs with a bolt action 5-shot rifle, you're mad. Like, that's my view on it. So there is a definite need there for those fast follow-up shots, whether that be via a semi-automatic firearm, or simply a lever action, a pump action, or any other sort of action that you feel comfortable with, that you can provide those fast and humane follow-up shots. So, there's a reason there. But the biggest reason to me is we live in a free society. Well, that's how it's supposed to be. So if you, for example, you don't, as you said, you don't own any firearms, well, what if you'd like to go out and take up target shooting, for example? Yeah. Okay, so even if it was pistol shooting, then, that's why in pistol shooting, semi-automatic is quite popular, because why? You're running around, you're shooting at targets, you're trying to better your score, and you're just having a great time with everyone that's there. And that's the reality of firearm ownership in this country. But unfortunately, we get the media that's promoting, the smallest fraction of licensed shooters ever doing anything wrong. And they also focus on the people who do the wrong thing constantly, and that's the criminals with firearms.
Before we come back to your comment earlier about the appearance laws and this so-called rapid fire business, we'll get to that in a second. I want to stick with the sports shooting side of things for a moment. There's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with the idea of people owning guns for fun. Talk to me a little bit about, though, the reality that the sports shooting, it's my understanding, is one of those sports where men and women can compete on very much an equal footing when it comes to accuracy and precision. And in fact, there's an enormous disabled community that enjoys shooting as well.
Yeah, massively. And you'll find too, mate, like I remember years ago, I used to go out and I used to shoot in a rimfire pistol shoot, and it was run through the week at one of the local ranges near me at the time. And predominantly it would be a lot of elderly people who were going there. And when I say elderly, like I'm talking, in their 70s.
Yeah.
And it was funny. I always remember these two ladies, and I'd never really spoken to them, so I didn't know their names or anything. But every time we would go out there, the two of them would meet up, and this was every couple of weeks. So they'd meet up and they'd talk, oh, how's the grandkids, and doing this. And, and then it was their turn to shoot. And they'd shoot like 10 rounds of 22 through at the target and have a bit of a laugh. Then they'd go back and sit down and they were talking more, and they were talking about, oh, my son's doing this and my daughter's doing this, But, to me, I looked at that and I thought, you know what? It's not the shooting, is it? That's not the main focus here. It's the actual social aspect. And these are two elderly people who are absolutely no threat to anyone. And they're going out there with their semi-automatic, pistols, firing a few rounds down range and just having a great time. So I look at that and I think, who the hell wants to take that away from them? What would you prefer them to be, just sitting in front of the television with their microwave meal with no visitors or friends? You know what I mean? Like, it's just ridiculous when I look at that, to think, why would you want to stop those decent law-abiding people from enjoying some freedom?
You mentioned a little while ago the lever-action shotgun ban. That's a reference, I presume, to the Adler that was in the news a few years ago. We're kind of seeing Adler 2.0 in the form of this wedge-tail pump-action .308 rifle. Now, John Howard has been rolled out in the media recently, pushing to restrict this gun. Is it not fair to say, though, that when John Howard proposed the National Firearms Agreement in the first place back in 1996, he allowed pump-action rifles, did he not?
Correct. He okayed them. So, we've had and enjoyed the use of pump-action rifles ever since. And where's the incident where licensed shooters are doing something wrong with it? That's why I think it's just a complete witch hunt. And if I may just very quickly touch on that for a lot of people who may be watching this and may not understand, Topher, is, we've had pump-action rifles since the early 1900s. Like the first ones were around about 1908 that came out. So in .308 caliber, which they're talking about with the wedge tail, from my knowledge, and look, I'm certainly not a historian, but my knowledge, it was about 1953, 1955 when Remington first brought one out in the 760, not the 7600, but the 760. And that ran through till about 1981. And then we saw the Remington 7600s come out, which was just an improved model. And the wedge tail is no different. I mean, it's manually operated. What more do you want? I mean, John Howard said back in 1996, as you touched on, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's the semi-automatics. There's no other way. Okay, well, all that was handed over. So leave us alone with what we've got. There's no new technology. It doesn't matter what they want to talk about with even the spring-assisted, on the pump. So what they mean by that is when you pull back on the pump, if you let it go, it will slide forward and then you'll be able to fire again. To me, I actually find that more of a, I guess, a hindrance, for a better term, than a normal pump action. I prefer, personally, a pump action that I can move forward with my hand and it locks into place. I fire, then it releases and I can manipulate it again. With this, it's different. It goes forward and you fire, but then you've got to manually operate it again. But I actually find that a hindrance, because if you hold on to the wedge tail and you pull it back into your shoulder, if you're holding on to that pump, that forend, well, what happens when you pull it back into your shoulder? You're pulling it out of battery, so it's not going to fire. So you've then got to move your hand back and put it into another position. So that takes even longer over a traditional pump that locks forward. So this business of, oh, no, it's new technology and all the rest of it, no, it's not. There's nothing new about it. It is simply a pump action. If it was new technology, it would be required on a permit to acquire application to put down a different action type. There's only one action type, and that's pump action for that particular firearm.
Now, a lot of people aren't aware that we actually have Australian firearms manufacturers. There's two that I know of, Southern Cross Arms and Wedgetail. There may be a few more. Apologies to any others that I've missed. But one of the things that people react to is not so much who makes the gun or even how the gun operates, but largely just how it looks. A lot of people would look at this picture on the screen right now and say, oh, scary black gun, that must be one of the ones, that must be a fully automatic weapon of war.
Yeah, that's right. And this is what a lot of people don't realise, Topher, is we've had cosmetic appearance laws since 1996, when they wrote the legislation for the various states and territories under the definition of Category D firearm, or weapon as they're classed as here in Queensland, because it is the Weapons Act, because it encompasses, knives and other weapons. It clearly says there that any firearm that substantially duplicates in function or appearance will be classed as a Category D firearm or weapon. So it just depends on how each state has enforced that to the reality of it. And unfortunately, we see New South Wales, ACT, and obviously Tasmania enforcing that in relation to the wedge-tail pump-action rifle. But then you think, okay, you can have a Remington 7600 in 308. You can still get a 10-round magazine for that. Still fires exactly the same, and that's okay. So my argument with that is that just completely null and voids your argument for public safety, because you can't pick and choose just on the appearance. That's utterly ridiculous.
It is absurd. Now, but absurd kind of sums up Australia's firearm laws. I'll bring one example that I came across as I was researching for this particular segment. This is Wedgetail Industries once again. They actually manufacture suppressors, and a lot of Australians recoil at the thought of a suppressed firearm. They believe in the Hollywood version where it just makes a little pew, pew. But I happen to be aware from my own life experience, if you go shooting in the UK and you're not using a suppressor, it's considered extremely rude. And in some places, you'll actually get into quite a lot of trouble for it. Why are we such an outlier when it comes to this here in Australia?
I don't know. And I've questioned myself on that, because, you look at our closest cousins, New Zealand, and even after we had the shooting over there and then their rehaul of their gun laws. I mean, we even sent people from our own firearms registry over here to New Zealand to guide them on the new laws, yet they're still allowed to have semi-automatic rimfire rifles up to 10 rounds, semi-automatic and pump shotguns up to 5 rounds, plus suppressors still freely available. And you think to yourself, well, why? Why is this, I guess they're holding on so tightly here to the fact that if you have a suppressor, you turn into an assassin. And, I blame Hollywood for that. But, very quickly I'll explain this to, your viewers who may be thinking, well, why do people need a suppressor? One, it reduces recoil. Two, it obviously reduces the noise. So when you look at it from a workplace health and safety point of view, I mean, especially here in Queensland, no one has suppressors, even though workplace health and safety independent auditors will come out to like a farm, for example, and conduct a audit, and they will highly recommend it and say that, okay, you're lacking here, especially if you're sitting in like a harvester or a tractor and you're shooting as you're going through fields of wheat or whatever it may be that you're farming. The noise levels are dangerous. And a suppressor, as you say, it doesn't make it just go cool, cool. Like the only way for it to really, really reduce the noise and be extremely effective is when you're using subsonic ammunition. So to me, if you're using subsonic ammunition out of, let's take hypothetically a very popular caliber like 223. So if you're using subsonic ammunition through that, what have you in effect done? You've turned it into a 22 LR, haven't you? Because it's going at subsonic velocity, so maybe about 1,000 feet a second, pushing maybe a 40 to 55 grain pill at that speed. Well, what have you done? You've turned it into like a 22 LR or 22 Magnum. So you're still going to hear. It's not completely silent. You're still going to hear that noise. But with the high velocity ammunition, where you have that supersonic clout, because it is just physics at the end of the day, you still have that crack when it fires, but it takes a lot of the loud boom and everything away, so that that people who are, especially in an occupational environment, can lower that noise. But it's not just the occupational environment, in my view, that this should be applied. All the ranges. I mean, the SSAA Brisbane here, for years, have had continual complaints from, housing estates that have gone in around the range. Guys, we're willing to work with you. Why not allow people at the range to have a suppressor, and then everyone's happy? We can have the shooters that still enjoy their sport and their hobby, but we can have local residents that can enjoy a bit more of peace and quiet. It's because you don't have that loud boom that's going to just carry and carry and carry for distance. So yeah, there's so many practical applications for suppressors here. I cannot believe they're not legal.
It's the only technology that I'm aware of where the government has put in place regulations to make them loud. I'm not aware of that having happened in any other area of technology. One last quick anecdote. When I was in Texas some time ago, I was working on a film over there and we got to shoot a lot of guns. I got to shoot an AR-10, so that's chambered in .308, and it was suppressed. And it was absolutely magnificent because once we went to that rifle, having been shooting 5.56 and other things with the big cans on and hearing protection, all of a sudden all of that could come off. And it was still loud. It was like someone banged a drum near you. It wasn't quiet, but it wasn't damaging to your hearing. And all of a sudden we could talk to each other. And if there was an issue and someone had to say stop, 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 which is your universal, you're on a range or anywhere else. If someone sees a safety issue, they're going to yell stop, stop, stop. You could hear so much better and so much clearer because you didn't have to wear the massive cans because the weapon itself was made quieter. I think there are massive safety upsides to suppressors, and Australia is genuinely one of the few countries in the world crazy enough to be banning them. Ozzie, is there a silver lining here? Is there light at the end of this tunnel, or are we staring into an abyss of ever more regulation in this area?
I think we're staring into an abyss, definitely, but it's not just firearms, mate. You've got to look very realistically at what's happening now. I mean, fishing is being restricted. Bow hunting is being restricted. They are coming for everything that you enjoy. And the only way to fight back that I say about this is fight back at the ballot box. We all have that freedom to be able to vote, and it is mandatory here in Australia anyway. So why not join together and vote as one? I mean, we've got over 1 million licensed shooters alone. I know a lot of them will be, four-wheel drive and fishing enthusiasts and so forth, but we've all got friends, family members that we can speak to. And then when it comes election time, get out there and do something. I mean, every election I'm at a polling booth, handing out how to vote cards, whether it be for Liberal Democrats, Katter Party, One Nation, whoever at the time. I'm happy to do that. And, I'm happy to give up 4 hours or something like that on of a morning on election day. And mate, it means the world to the candidates, and people go, oh, well, they didn't get voted in anyway, did they? But, well, what, should I just stay home and just give up? This is the thing. If we all get involved in this, so when any restriction is proposed, our local members, both state and federal, are flooded with emails. They come in on Monday morning and they open their email box and there's 1,000 odd emails there saying, if you support this, I will not vote for you. That sends an insanely powerful message. But shooters, instead of that, they'll spend the same amount of time, if not more, whinging online about how they've lost more or blaming everyone else and doing absolutely nothing themselves. So, it's just so disappointing and frustrating because, mate, we have the numbers. We actually have the numbers, in my view, to shape all future elections at every level. All we've got to do is just come together.
Well, that's so true, though, in so many different areas. Well, Ozzie, thank you so much for your time with this interview. All the best with your ongoing... I love your work, by the way. I'm a bit of a fan of your channel.
Thank
Ozzie
you,
Reviews. We'll put the link in the description. But also, I think I can only hope that we see some more sanity when it comes to firearms legislation in this country at some point in my lifetime. But then again, we'll have to wait and see. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com, and don't forget to join our email list while you're there so that we can keep in touch with you even if or when we get deplatformed off social media. And please consider supporting the Aussie Wire by becoming an insider via the link in the video description. Thanks for watching. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.